Hey, Accelerated Algebra, we're moving on to section 10.4, which is solving radical equations. Make sure that you're taking notes while you do this, and there'll be some practice problems at the end. Today we're going to solve equations that look like this, with a square root on one side. And one of the techniques that we're going to use is squaring both sides. There are things that we have to be really careful about, and we're going to talk about those as we go through some examples. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve this one. So like we talked about, we're going to square both sides. Now, if we square a square root, we just end up with the radicand, x minus 1. And over here we've got 9. And then if we add 1 to both sides, we'll get x equals 10. Now, it's a good idea to check, and we're going to talk about why that's super essential with these kind of problems later. I checked, and x equals 10 works fine, so that's my solution. Now, here's a reminder. If you're going to square both sides like we just did, you have to square the entire expression on both sides. So now, if I just go ahead and square this, you'll notice that I would have to FOIL this out, and that is not going to be fun. So the better kind of way to go about this, the cleaner way, is to isolate the square root first. Okay, so let's try that. All right, so instead of trying to square both sides first, let's subtract 7. And now I've got the square root of y plus 5 equals 5. Now when I go to square both sides, this is going to be a lot cleaner. When I square the square root, I just get the radicand, y plus 5 equals 25. So I've got y equals 20. And then I'm going to check just to make sure everything turns out fine, so that's my solution. Remember when we solved by taking the square root of both sides? We had to be careful because there were two square roots to consider. So if we took the square root of both sides, we had to think of this plus or minus 4. And so we ended up with either x minus 3 equals 2 or x minus 3 equals negative 2. So we had the two solutions there. So now when we square both sides, we have to be careful that we don't end up with this extra solution. If we've got the square root of x equals negative 5, we know this has no solution because the principal square root is never negative. It's defined that way. But if we go ahead and square both sides, what happens? It seems like x equals 25 should be a solution. Now, we know it's not because we know what we started with has no solution. So we've got to watch out for these, and these are called extraneous solutions. A couple of reminders here. Isolating the square root is a good idea. We have to be sure to square the entire expression on both sides, and then we're going to watch out for these extraneous solutions. The square root here is already all by itself. So I'm just going to square both sides. I'm going to be really careful about this second one as I do this. So on this side, I've got k plus 1. And on this side, I've got k minus 1 squared, which means k minus 1 times k minus 1. Be sure that you FOIL this all out or use the matrix method. So I've got k plus 1 equals k squared minus 2k plus 1. So now how am I going to solve this? Well, this is a quadratic equation. I need to probably set it equal to 0. And now I'm going to factor because that looks pretty easy to factor. It seems like I have two solutions here. Let me check. First, we'll check k equals 0. This is not true. So that means that k equals 0 is an extraneous solution. Let's check k equals 3. That one works fine. So k equals 3 is our only solution. Okay, let's try another one. Again, we have the square root isolated, so all we have to do is square, and we're going to square over here. Pause the video, try it from here, and then check your answers. You can see that I got my two solutions, x equals 5 and x equals 2. I checked them in the original equation, and I can see that x equals 5 works fine, and x equals 2 does not work. Don't forget, with these equations, you got to be really careful. Go back and cross this one off. Do not report that as one of your solutions. You only have one solution. Here's your practice, and it is also on page 644 of your textbook. So don't forget with these that you're going to isolate the square roots first, square both sides, and check for extraneous solutions. So as a hint here, perhaps on number 20, what I might try first is add 8 to both sides, then divide by 2, and then square both sides. Complete these problems, check your solutions. They'll be posted, and then you've got a couple of questions on Schoology.